So my father had retail businesses when I was growing up. We started working for him when I was 13 years old. So I've been working retail since 1972. So growing up, it was pretty much classic rock and Beatles, the Stones, the Who, Jimi Hendrix. I guess starting mid to late 60s, so I was like 7 or 8 years old in the late 60s, and I grew up. I had an older brother and an older sister who had records on most of those bands, the Byrds. The Monkees were big when I was a kid. And when I was like 9 or 10, that was the big show on TV, so everybody watched the Monkees. But pretty much classic rock throughout to the, I'd say, mid-70s. So it was pretty much just a classic rock background. A little bit of Motown thrown in there. Mid-70s, it just kicked in. You know, I was starting to go to more concerts when I was getting to high school. And then when I was at 16, I had use of a car. So then I started going to a lot more concerts, and then just easier to get to the record stores. So it just really kicked in and really became like almost like not a full-time focus, but outside of school, it was really kind of took over things for me. Sometime in I would say 15 or 16, I kind of liked the idea of having my own business. And I was into books and music, and really by the next year or two, music sort of took over. So really opening a record store was sort of my prime thought. I went away to college, and actually during college, there was a little record store in the student union, and he'd agreed to sell it. And then at the last minute, he backed out. So that was probably I was 19 or 20. But that sort of put the seed in my mind that, it was not that hard to open a record store or to buy a record store. Freshman year, so that was 77, one of the neighbors was blasting Sex Pistols, and always 3 in the morning at full volume. And the first couple of nights, that's really annoying, and like by the third night, I actually really liked it. Read a couple of good reviews about The Clash. Based on the review of The Clash, I just went and bought the record because it wasn't there wasn't any way to sample it. There wasn't any radio stations or internet to find out, so I just went out and bought it. And then when I got the first Clash album from that, that just blew me away. And then and that was at that time the second album was already out by the time that was available in the States. So the first couple Clash records, and I'd go into there was a local store in Philadelphia called Plastic Fantastic. I still have some of the price stickers. All the punk records were like $2.99. Bought a lot of stuff there, and there was a couple of clerks there. Really would make good recommendations, and I was at that point trying to seek out some of the British magazines, which was at that point in time the best way to find out about these bands. So it sort of kind of grew from there, and I had a couple kids on my floor sophomore year that were going up to New York to see the punk shows, and I wanted to see the Clash at Bonds, and they were talking about how great it was, and then the Clash actually played Philadelphia that next spring, so I was able to go to that show. They played the Tower Theater, which is about 3,000 people, I believe. It was just a lot of energy from start to finish. It was just blew me away, and I just wanted more of that, more shows, more bands, and that sort of got me into the Undertones. Were touring with them at the time. Stiff Little Fingers, I just started going to any bands that people recommend were in that same vein. So it just really took off for me. Well, I graduated college in spring of 1981 without any serious job prospects or not a real concrete notion of what I was going to do with my life. There was a local store in Bethesda. It was just called the Record and Video Store, but they were for sale. The woman had opened and it was not doing well, and she was anxious to get out. So I just saw it as an opportunity to start something. So by that point it was spring of 1982. So I took over that business and renamed it Spotlight Records and Video. So that was the first iteration of Smash, and that was 2 years before we moved to Georgetown. But we started bringing in, obviously more punk, like Joy Division and Bauhaus, Cure albums. So I remember the first time I sold 2 Michael Jackson Thriller cassettes that had just come out. That was my first day of sales. So I do say Michael Jackson did help me get through this first 2 months. So I may not have lasted without Michael Jackson Thriller record. So I was sort of looking around, and I had found a space in Northwest DC on MacArthur Boulevard, and it was above a current video store. And they rented the upstairs. So obviously we got rid of the videos and just concentrated on music. At that point, it was summer of '83. So I had just over a year at the one place. The landlords graciously let me out of the lease. So we moved to MacArthur Boulevard. I was there for about a year. So it was, and there was down the street from Georgetown Prep, there was a pretty big growing mod scene at the time. So I did have a lot of those students coming over and buy mod records. And by that time we were starting, like the Smiths were just coming out. So we did well with brands like the Smiths. One of the employees at the video store, John Mazuzin, was really into the punk scene, and he was getting me into some more and more punk bands. So we actually agreed to go in as partners and move the store into Georgetown. So from there, once we opened up, punk became more of the focus. So we went from just records and cassettes, patches, pins, the studs themselves, the leather jackets, studded belts, Doc Martens. We sort of just expanded that to just punk stuff in general. The customers sort of led the direction of the store. So really sort of just following what the customers were asking for, especially when you multiple customers come in. We'd have like Joy Division, and people would say, I didn't know anyone else had ever heard of Joy Division. You know, it's like, wow, I can't believe you have a Joy Division record and Smiths record. So a lot of the bands we were carrying weren't readily available elsewhere.